Good evening, Dr. Anish Andheria. Welcome. Good evening to all of you.
Good evening to everybody.
Great. Let me first begin by introducing our today's speaker, Dr. Anish Andheria. Dr. Andheria is the president of the Wildlife Conservation Trust, a not-for-profit setup to preserve, protect, and conserve wildlife and fight climate change. Currently, WCT, short form of W, that is Wildlife Conservation Trust, works in and around 130 national parks and wildlife sanctuaries spread across 23 states of India and catalyzes path-breaking conservation action. He is a member of both the Maharashtra State Board of Wildlife and the first state expert appraisal committee for projects related to industries, mining, and irrigation in Maharashtra. He is also a member of the steering committee of the Madhya Pradesh Tiger Conservation Foundation. He has been awarded the prestigious Carl Zeiss Conservation Award 2008. He is a fellow of the LEAD, an international leadership program on environment and development spread across 80 countries. He has helped to set up the Kids for Tigers, a nationwide conservation education program in the year 2000. The program is in its 22nd year, I would say, and reaches out to nearly 250,000 school children. After completing his PhD from the Institute of Chemical Technology, people know it as UDCT, Mumbai, he went on to pursue his master's in wildlife biology and conservation from the National Center for Biological Sciences, that is NCBS, Bengaluru. He is a large carnivore specialist with immense knowledge on prey-predator relationships. A wildlife photographer of repute, he has photographed some of the most remote wildlife reserves in India. His love affair with the camera began in 1994 and continues to be fired by his awe and passion for nature. His collection of over 3 lakh images serves as a veritable archival record of the wildlife and wilderness of India. His images have been widely used in national and international publications. He has co-authored 2 books on the Indian wildlife, has contributed to several other books and publications, including scientific papers. He is a trustee of the Conservation Wildlands Trust and the Climate Reality Project India. He is also on the advisory board for the Nature's Jamboree, an organization started to promote traditional art forms and artisans. A natural communicator, he is one of India's leading motivational speakers and has introduced thousands of young people to the joys of nature and the rationale for nature conservation. In his view, photography is a conservation tool that has the power to motivate people to rise in defense of the vanishing wilds. He likes to capture landscapes and animals in the raw while revealing his own deep reverence for the natural world. He believes that the marriage of science and conservation and aesthetics is important to engage people in the race to protect the remaining wildernesses on planet Earth. According to him, if his images inform people of a world outside their own existence, which runs independent of the machination of Homo sapiens, his purpose as a photographer would be fulfilled. Thank you, Anish. Thank you very much for being here today. And I take pride that you are my student from Bhavan's College way back in the later 1980s. Thank you for being here. Over to you, Anish.
Pleasure is mine. So should I start with the presentation or? Okay. So how much time do I have now? It's 6:08. Do we have a question answer session immediately or?
There will be, yeah, at the end
there
of
will be.
Sure.
Okay, fine. So can I request Prachi to go to the slide view mode?
Yeah, it's on, Anish.
And
so no, can you go full screen, Prachi? That's what I meant.
Yeah, this.
No, I can't see full screen here. It's open in the.
Might be a little slow, but here I'm on full screen.
Okay. Can you try that once again?
Okay, let me stop share and try it again. Yeah?
Yes, now it is.
Okay.
Thanks.
No problem.
Okay, so this, so what I'm going to share is what I've learned and what I grapple with pretty much on a daily basis since the last, I would say, 25 years. My organization, Wildlife Conservation Trust, tries to work in large landscapes in collaboration with the state governments, trying to fill the gaps that exist in the field of conservation in the government, and also because we think that there is no better instrument than the Wildlife Protection Act and the Forest Conservation Act to protect our wildernesses and the biodiversity of this extremely beautiful nation. Next slide, please. So, challenges in conservation, there are many. Some are intrinsic to India, some are because of climate change, where India is a contributor, but not a major contributor yet. But the way we are progressing, the way we are developing, we may soon overtake some of the most polluting nations on earth. So that way, challenges are many. Some we as a country can do a lot about, some we cannot do much other than having dialogues with other countries who are sailing in the same boat. As far as the biggest, I mean, some of the biggest challenges is the challenge of water. We are about 18% when it comes to the population, but we only have about 4% of the world's renewable water sources. When I say renewable water resources, I mean water that gets collected on the surface, which means water that flows in the rivers and water that gets collected in dams, and that is the lakes that we have. We also have brackish water lakes, but we don't use that water for drinking. Most of the lakes are formed because of dams that are built on the rivers, and rivers, we know, are fed by the forests and by the Himalayas. Next slide. India's forest is worth many $trillion, and it is impossible to actually measure the wealth of the forests of India and other ecosystems. When I say forest, please understand that I don't want to restrict to jungles that we all love so much, but there are so many other ecosystems. Grasslands, very important. Mangroves, very important. Marine grasslands, marine grass beds, seagrass, where seagrass is found. Then there are a lot of coral reefs, which are producers in the ocean. Then we have deserts, we have marshy flatlands in the little run of Kutch. We have high altitude deserts in Ladakh, the Trans Himalayas. All these ecosystems are equally important because they support some of those species that are not found anywhere else, either not anywhere else on earth or not anywhere else in other ecosystems. And so when you hear about value of a forest, you must understand that it is a gross underestimation of the actual worth of the forest. Next slide. Nearly 600 rivers either originate from or are fed by the forests of India. And these forests that I'm talking about are tiger-bearing forests, forests where tigers are found. So tigers are synonymous with water. Tigers are synonymous with jungles. Tigers are also synonymous with grasslands because there are so many arid areas like in Rajasthan, also parts of Maharashtra, where you have tigers, and these habitats are very, very different from a typical forest. Next slide. Forests also are very important from the perspective of livelihoods. Nearly 40% of India's energy needs is met by fuel wood. Can you imagine? We still, as a nation, depends on wood collected from the forest to either cook, heat water, or for keeping our environment bright in the night. There are so many marginalized communities that are dependent on the forest for energy. Cooking largely by families that live in the proximity of India's forests and other ecosystems. They are completely dependent on fuel wood. Nearly 30% of India's need for fodder comes from the forest. So this photo is from Pench in Madhya Pradesh, and you can see hundreds of cattle and buffalo grazing. This is buffer zone of a tiger reserve. And so forests are not only protecting India's biodiversity, but it's also supporting the most marginalized communities. Whether this is good or bad for the forest is a different matter. But as of now, without them, we would have had a law and order situation, because the poorest of the poor would not have wood to cook. How can they have food without cooking? Next slide. India has done exceedingly well, though, in terms of tiger conservation. India supports nearly 70% of all tigers that live on this planet. However, this population is substandard. People talk about the carrying capacity of the forest, but the challenge is that many of these forests are under tremendous anthropogenic pressure, which means millions of people on a daily basis are entering our forests and other ecosystems to collect natural resources. And these are the ecosystems where wildlife is found. So no fault of wildlife, no fault of these poor people. There is a loss on both sides, because forest is getting degraded, the ecosystems are getting degraded, their ability to sequester carbon is reducing, and these poor people are not able to break free of this vicious cycle that they are in, constant debt cycle that they are in, where they're not able to make their ends meet. So despite so much pressure that people are putting on the forest, their lifestyles are not improving, they are worsening. So it's a zero-sum game on both sides. Next slide. These forests are also home to so many different types of invertebrates, insects being some of the most dominant of those invertebrates. And they have such integral role to play when it comes to pollination, when it comes to controlling pests. All this is possible. These are ecosystem services that we are talking about. They are all taken for granted because we don't pay for it directly. But if you were to understand the true value of an ecosystem, then these figures are startling. Just 1 rupee spent on the management of tiger reserves. I'm just talking about tiger reserves because data is available from the tiger reserves, because you have a National Tiger Conservation Authority. So they know exactly where every penny goes. And so I'm using tiger reserves as a case study to make my point. But there are so many other ecosystems which are equally important. So tiger reserves, 1 rupee spent on the management of tiger reserve gives ecosystem services, which is somewhere between 200 to 530 times that value. There is no business on this planet that can give you this kind of return. And yet we are blasting the mountains in the name of development. We are building kilometers of road every day, many kilometers of road every day. That's fragmenting these ecosystems. We are flooding our ecosystems because of the climate change action. because the cost that I spoke about is not seen in our banks. So we have to understand that the biggest challenge is attribution. How do we attribute the value to our ecosystems? We only put value to what you can buy in rupees, and therefore there is a lot of value given to insignificant things like a big 1,500 square feet flat apartment in a Bombay or a Bangalore or a Delhi. We just, however, cannot put any value to water that we drink, because 1,000 liters of water is available to us for just 6 rupees. And so the biggest challenge in my mind is the true value of the natural resources that we are using in terms of oxygen, in terms of water, and in terms of food. Food is also subsidized in a big way. So when people blame the government, you must understand that the government, if they were to charge the real value of food, about 85% of India will starve to death because they will not be able to pay for a morsel on a daily basis. So food, oxygen, and water, they are all grossly underpriced, and they are a byproduct of our ecosystems, the natural ecosystems. Monsoon in India is governed by the mountains in the Western Ghats, in the Himalayas, in the Eastern Ghats, in Satpura, in Vindhyas, in Aravalis. These are the mountains which are important, but they are blasted away for mining of granite, for other minerals, because to most people, you think that they are just of no use, let us put them to use properly, or they are blasted because of coal. So we have to understand that we need to attribute value in the right way. Next slide, please. Another challenge is to see how we can translate this biodiversity into income. We are not able to do that currently. India is one of the most biodiverse countries on earth. It is fortunate that it's situated in the tropics, because of which it has more than 1,300 species of birds, more than 1,500 species of butterflies, 400 plus species of mammals, 300 plus species of snakes. India is the only country that has more than 15 species of cats and more than 25,000 species of flowering plants exist in this country. However, the returns from these biodiverse landscapes is minimalistic because we have not been able to utilize the potential in terms of tourism. And tourism that I'm talking about is the real ecotourism, not the tourism that we see in Ranthambore, not the kind of tourism we see in Corbett, but the kind of tourism you see in Ladakh, where most of the money is earned by the villagers who are responsible for the biodiversity around in their landscape. So we need to, that's a challenge really. How are we going to improve the livelihoods of these millions of people? And by millions, I'm saying 300 million people are dependent on the forests of India or the protected areas of India. There are around 900 protected areas in India, and more than 300 million people are directly dependent for their livelihoods to about 40% of their daily subsistence comes from these protected areas alone. There is a vast stretches of forest outside the protected area network, because protected area network is just 5% of India. There is another 10% of India, which is double the size of the protected area network, which is still good quality or relatively good quality ecosystems. Millions of people are dependent on those. Without those ecosystems, because of COVID, we would have had a severe social unrest, because most of these unemployed people who went back to the villages could survive because there was food in terms of natural resources, some plants, fruits, In some cases, even animals, because a lot of these people went out there for protein. And you can imagine that a family doesn't have money. They obviously can survive only if they depend on some protein in the forest. And there were a lot of animals that were hunted down in the last 2 years. But because India is biodiverse, because there are ecosystems, because the government protects these landscapes, India was able to fight the dreaded pandemic that we are suffering. Next slide. The crisis is global, and India can never be looked at in isolation of this global crisis. So whatever India is suffering because of extremely high density human populations, a lot of inequity between the rich and the poor, inaccessibility in terms of good education, good health, these are intrinsic to the country. But there is a global crisis as well. In the last 70 years, the world population has gone up multiple times. However, if you look at the demand for water, it has increased sixfold. And that means that the pressure this increased population is putting on water, which is the most prized resource, actually underpriced resource, but most important, has escalated tremendously. And a country like India, you can imagine what it means. That on one hand, the number of people who live below the poverty line, really, in terms of doubly marginalized people, is increasing, but the water that's available to them is decreasing. 60% of all our vertebrate populations have dropped in the last, I would say, about 45, 50 years. And that is a big thing, because the ecosystem services that I spoke of come from these ecosystems because they have wildlife in there. There are vertebrates. When I say vertebrates, you are talking about birds which are pollinating, dispersing seeds, mammals who are also doing that. There is this web of life that runs within any ecosystem, is dependent not only just on the abiotic factor, which means on the minerals, on the soil, on the rocks, on the water, on the oxygen, but also on the biotic side, which means plants and animals. And there has been a decline in 60% of these vertebrates across this planet, which means the ability of these ecosystems to self-repair themselves is going down. And that's very scary. 20 of the last 21 years have been the hottest on this planet. We all know about this. We know about climate change. Some of us call it global warming. But with this warming, what happens is that the weather behaves in a very erratic manner, which means wet places become wetter, which means there are more frequent floods there. When floods happen, they wash off a lot of topsoil, and 6 inches of soil takes 1,000 years to form. And one severe flood can wash away nearly 2 feet of soil, which means it has undone what nature did for 4,000 years in just one flash flood. So the impact of climate change on so many other secondary factors is immense. And we are just worried about the increasing temperature. We keep saying that the temperature of this planet cannot go beyond 1.5 degrees of the pre-industrial era. But even with 1.5 degrees, the cascading effect of flooding, the cascading effect of drought, because when everything dries up, trees die, vegetation die, and soil becomes loose, and that soil can be blown away in a cyclone. Millions of tons of soil is being thrown up in the atmosphere because of cyclones. All that dust that is either going into the sea, or it is settling on ice, because of which the ice is becoming darker. And you know that the dark objects absorb more heat, which means the melting of the ice is escalated because of the dust that is settling from the tropics, which means from Brazil, from Congo, from parts of India, from Southeast Asia, where the forests are degrading, where we are having tremendous levels of deforestation. The soils from there are being picked up by winds and they are thrown on ice in Antarctica and Arctic, on the Himalayan slopes, on other Rockies and Andes, these mountains, and the melting rate of this ice has gone up. Thousands of glaciers have melted because of it. So you have to read between the lines when you talk of climate change. The biggest threat because of climate change is climate refugees. More than 14 crore people will be moving out of their native countries because of lack of livelihoods, or lack of natural resources by 2030. And you have started seeing this, and sometimes, you know, climate refugees, it's not written on their faces, but most people, in fact, you ask the next generation, they all want to either settle in America, they want to go to Europe, they want to go to Australia. Why? Because they think in India the options, or the livelihood is going to be a big problem. There is huge amount of unemployment and people are moving out. Now we think of them as migrants who want to, or immigrants who want to go and stay abroad. However, they are in a way climate migrants too, because if we had good quality air, if there were jobs, nobody would want to leave their own country. So that mass exodus that we are talking about has already started, but it will have a very ugly face, because you are going to see so many poor countries. You already see it in South America, where people from Guatemala and so many other poor countries are marching through several countries into America because they want a better life. And you can imagine the kind of life a migrant has to live, because they have no identity in the country that they go in, and obviously they get exploited. Such people get frustrated, and eventually there is violence. It's very easy to induct such people in terrorism, in activities which are either anti-government or anti-humanity. And so you can see so many small outfits popping up from different countries where there is huge amount of environment degradation. So social unrest and environment degradation are linked, and that's a very, very big and scary thing. And it's a challenge as to how are you going to. So first step is not to find a great or a healthy environment for these people, but to make sure that the environment degradation is stopped. So we need to come together as the planet to solve problems which are different for different countries. Climate change battles are not being fought in the way they should be fought, because there is too much of disparity between different nations. So the way climate change manifests to an American is very different to how it manifests to an Indian, compared to how it will manifest to somebody living in Sudan, to somebody who lives in an oceanic island which is going to get drowned. For instance, Maldives, some parts of Maldives are below sea level. You can imagine the fate of people. There are millions of people living all across oceanic islands. There are so many islands in Indonesia. There are so many islands in Atlantic Ocean. These are all islands which are under tremendous stress from sea level rise. So climate change means different things to different people, and that is why people are not reacting to it in the same way. And we need to all come together to understand that what is happening to our nation today will happen to you as well. So even if for prosperous countries, if everybody were to move to America, America will soon have more number of people than India is holding. And then it will suffer from the same kind of problems that India is facing. And so nobody is immune to this. And that is again a big challenge. That is why when we go and meet at the COP26, you know, people have apprehensions whether these meetings will ever bear fruits, because people sing their own songs because they think of themselves in isolation of the other. So we are sailing in the same boat. That's the most important fact. And the biggest challenge is for countries to understand that it doesn't matter what your currency is. Your fate is the same as the poorest. Climate change is also increasing the intensity of fire. In the last 3 or 4 years, we have seen many thousand hectares of forest land burned by fires. Australia has seen some of the most devastating fires, and some numbers of how many animals are lost. According to them, it is more than a billion with a B. A billion animals have died in Australian fires. Can you imagine the amount of biodiversity loss that the Amazon is facing? Because the fires in Amazon are also racing, and they are all man-made. Australian fires may not be, not all of them, but all of the fires that you see in the tropics are man-made. All forest fires in India are largely man-made. They are because shepherds are burning dry vegetation so that the ash from that vegetation can allow fresh grass to sprout. And that fire, because of the reduced humidity, largely because of climate change, gets out of control and it burns a lot more than they intended to burn. And so millions of hectares of tree cover have been lost just because of fires. Next slide. India's biggest challenge is population. I've already spoken about it. We are nearly 1.4 billion people now with 1.4 billion aspirations. You can imagine what we can do. This is a photo of Jammu cultivation from the northeast. And you can see how tiny that man looks when he's sitting on that tree, which he has cut and burned, so that he can and his family can earn a living or at least subsist by having some amount of agriculture on this land. And so there are a huge number of challenges, very, very unique to India. And we have to realize that we don't have any time left. Maybe we keep talking about 2030 or 2040, or say India needs to get out of coal. The government says that India will move away from coal by 2070. America may have time till 2070, but India doesn't have that. So we have to start today. And we have to make those big changes. It may not be possible, but we have to try. Next slide. Very high dependence on, I told you, firewood. It is being taken out of the forest. Millions of tons of wood is being taken out on a daily basis. Not only head loads, but now people are even using bullock carts. Some of them are using motorcycles, and some are using big tractors. There's a very big dependence on sand as well, which many people don't even know, but that is the biggest crisis. Most of our river systems that get dry are degraded during the dry season because the land mafia, the construction mafia, is taking sand out of those riverbeds for construction. So as our cities grow in size, as our second tier towns become bigger, there is a need, acute need for building material, and all of it is coming from our rivers. As a result, during the next subsequent season, because so much sand has gone away, the river actually changes its course and it actually damages so much more. So a lot of these flash floods that you hear of, people don't pinpoint it to sand mining, but a lot of it, if not all, is because of that. Next slide. As I said, 3 million people live just inside the 51 tiger reserves of India. There are more than 300 million people who are dependent on various ecosystems in India. But 3 million people live inside India's tiger reserves. You can imagine the kind of pressure they put on natural resources there. Next slide. This I've already told you. Just on the 900 protected areas of India, you have 300 million people. And this photo is of a tiger reserve, by the way. This looks like a village to you, but it's inside the buffer zone of one of the most famous tiger reserves called Bandhavgarh. And you can imagine this is the place where tigers and deer, snakes are interacting with people on a daily basis. And it's not surprising to know that there is huge amount of conflict in all those parks where hundreds of thousands of people live alongside large mammals. Next slide. Nearly 60-65% of Indians are farmers. 85% of those are subsistence farmers, which means 85% of all farmers, which is, you can imagine, nearly, I would say, 65% of Indians are farmers today. Of that 85%. So I would say nearly 55% of Indians are dependent on subsistence farming, which is so delicate because it is dependent on so many different environmental factors, whether it's going to rain, if the season is shifting, pollination may not happen. A lot of crops are lost because of that. Droughts, floods, so all those things ensure that these more than 50% of Indians remain in a perpetual cycle of debt. That's a very big challenge. So we need to try and see and be innovative to see how these poor people, nearly 50% of our country, can have livelihoods, at the same time feed into the biodiversity of the country. Next slide, please. So these challenges that I'm talking about also is an opportunity, because when you see a challenge, you automatically, if you have to sort it, you have to be more innovative to see that there is a win-win on both sides, which means people are happy, and only if people are happy will the ecosystem survive. So these challenges, don't think of them with a, don't look at it with a heavy heart. Okay, these are some things that we have inherited from the previous generation. Some of it we have contributed to, but technology and the knowledge that we have now, it is a magnitude more than what it was even 20 years ago, which means we are far better equipped to fight these challenges. The question is whether we have the will. When I say we, whether the political parties have the will, whether the policymakers have the will, whether the next generation and people who are listening to me, the younger generation, people who are in their teens, people who are in their 20s, people who are in their 30s, whether they have it in them to find green solutions for every single challenge that I have listed now. And you have to be creative. You may be a painter, you may be a writer, you may be a engineer, you may be a economist, you could be an ecologist. You all have to think how you as an individual with your sets of strengths support the reconstruction of environment. Roads are another challenge. India is building nearly 22 kilometers of 4-lane and 6-lane highway per day. We will soon build about 44 kilometers of 4-lane and 6-lane highway per day. As a result, most of our protected areas are under severe threat of fragmentation. All our corridors will be fragmented because of it. And some of our protected areas will also come under severe threat because the roads that are already passing through them will come for expansion. And that's a big challenge. Can we, with our technology, solve this? Can we move from an energy inefficient way of traveling, which is by road, to more energy efficient traveling, which is by trains, by trams, by metros? Is it possible to do? Because those modes can transport many more people than a vehicle can. Obviously, we keep talking about hybrid vehicles. We'll soon talk about solar vehicles, but even then, the impact of roads will not go down. You could move from a non-renewable fuel type of a thing to a more renewable energy source, but that is only solving half of the puzzle. The remaining half is the kind of infrastructure that we will build so that you and I can commute. Next slide, please. I have already told you about floods. I've already told you about forest fires. What can we do about them? This is where we are. Are we going to continue to build skyscrapers so that we feel safe from floods, or we'll find some better solutions? It all depends on the collective. It is not just the job of a conservationist or an environmentalist. And they are not against growth. They are people who can have the lens to see what is coming. That is the only difference between them and you. And therefore, they are scared, and therefore they are telling you what is bad for the environment and for this planet. No matter what you do, you can contribute. And I definitely feel that engineers, that technologists, industrialists have a very huge role to play in the coming decade, because this is the UN decade for ecosystem restoration. And ecosystem restoration means maintaining ecosystems in the way they are and bringing back the degraded ecosystems to good health. And that can happen only if we invest on technologies that need less energy, technologies that produce less waste, or technologies which mimic natural systems where the raw materials are completely biodegradable, and after that, whatever you make, once it leaves its life, that means after a life cycle, that particular material can go back into the soil. And nature shows us through so many different examples. There is no ounce of garbage in a jungle. Everything that the jungle produces can be reused back to give the nutrients into the nutrient cycle. Everything that the ocean produces can be consumed by the ocean. There is no foul byproduct in it. A dead animal is also life for so many more species. So we need to just simply look at the encyclopedia of the ecosystems, unlearn all the bad habits that we have, and try to give back to the environment. Next slide. All of it, when I talk about degradation of land, when I talk about conflict between people, when I talk about fight between rich and poor, is going to increase the kind of conflict that happens between people and wildlife. I was talking about poverty all the time, and in a country which is so poor, how can a farmer, how can a poor shepherd withstand the loss because of a wild animal? So when a leopard goes and kills something as small as a hen or a goat, it means a big jolt to a poor shepherd who keeps, or a person who is holding that livestock. A farmer who is having just 1 acre land, if a sounder of pig comes and destroys half of that land, he's already in debt. How is he going to come out of it? And so the lot of the frustration, it's, see, when you see somebody fighting on the road rage case, is not because of what you see. It's not because two vehicles have crashed into each other. It's because there are frustrated people inside those vehicles. And when they see damage, they cannot control their temper. And so when you see a man running with a weapon after a leopard, and people feel very angry towards this human being, but he's actually suffering from years of frustration. And that frustration is, he's not able to pinpoint it. He may think it is because of a particular political party or some MLA in his, or a rich community within his village. But those are symptoms. The real issue is environmental. So conflict between animals and people is also a big challenge, which is basically a byproduct of so many other issues. Next slide, please. Illegal wildlife trade again goes in hand with so many other illegal trades, because it fuels terrorism, it fuels smuggling of weapons, drugs, and human beings. So skins of tigers, tusks of elephants, horns of rhinos are exchanged for weapons, for drugs, and for people. And this, so the wildlife trade itself is the 4th largest illegal trade on earth. And you can imagine that if we can break the back, so that's a challenge. But the good thing is, if we are able to stop this illegal trade through international treaties, by signing certain treaties where all the countries sign in, automatically the raw material, which is animal body parts, which are used to in exchange of people, guns and all that, will not be there, because of which you will have a reduction in terrorism on this planet. So this challenge can also, if you can solve this issue, you will be able to fight so many other problems that are existing on this planet today. Next slide. So with this, I think I won't want to stop here, because I wanted to talk about the conservation challenges. So we can switch off the presentation, and I would want to take some questions. I will summarize what I was trying to say here. So I didn't want to paint a sad picture, but I also didn't want to not expose you to reality. So I've not painted any picture. What I've given you is a reality check. I don't want to talk fiction now. I am a conservationist, and I know that this is reality, yet I run an organization. We have about 80 people who work in Wildlife Conservation Trust. They're all young people, much younger than me. And that makes me very happy, because they are not, I mean, they are worried, but they are not sitting in their homes. They have given up some of the most, I would say, healthy jobs in terms of salaries to work for environment, to work for conservation, because they realize where the foundational issue is. Poverty, inequity, gender inequality, these are all symptoms. The real issue is the environmental issue. And so all those challenges that I have today listed, I don't want to give you any silver bullet, because there isn't any. And I don't know the capacity of the people who are listening to me. So all I want to do is to expose you to that. Now it's for you to figure out how you, as a person who breathes oxygen, drinks water and eats food on a daily basis to survive, is going to give back to the environment. And there is enough and more for every single human being to do. There is so many issues. You could tackle any of those, but think environment in whatever you do. And so the government is trying, but the government, because it's heavy, it's big, it may not be as efficient as some of the smaller organizations are. So join organizations that are working for a cause. Don't just think terrestrial systems. Start working on marine systems. After all, this planet is 70% water, and water systems are three-dimensional, unlike terrestrial systems, which are nearly two-dimensional. Because tree length is about 100, sometimes 200 feet. That's it. But the oceans, some of the deepest areas in the oceans are more than 12 kilometers deep. And so you can imagine how important it is to you to work on oceans. So young people who are listening to me, think of careers in marine ecosystems. We have to work on river systems. We have to work on not so charismatic ecosystems like the trans-Himalayan ecosystems, the deserts, the mangroves, the grasslands as well. We need all types of ecosystems if we have to maintain a biodiversity. So think of a problem, think of a species, think of a landscape, and then start thinking, how are you going to make a difference in that landscape? Automatically, it will all boil down to economics. It will all boil down to social capital. So most of your problems can be solved if you keep in mind local economy and the people who live there. So the problems of these people and of wildlife are not different. They are similar. That is what people don't understand. They think that if you have to save the elephant, they have to go and work directly with the elephant. You don't work with elephant herds. You work with people who live alongside elephants so that they are not hostile towards elephants. Or you don't work with dolphins directly. You work with fishers, people who are fishing there, and ghadials, the crocodiles. You don't work with ghadial by talking to ghadial. You talk to the fishermen, you talk to the government, you talk to the policymakers to see how rivers can accommodate these charismatic or so many other biodiverse, so many other species along with human beings. So these challenges, I would say, are extremely good. It will challenge the next generation. And I think with the knowledge that we already have, the legacy of the previous generation's work, they will be able to find solutions. I don't know whether we'll be able to find solutions on the right time, but I think I can already see so many young people, even in the corporate, who are far more green minded than the people that I saw when I was 20 years younger. Thank you.
Super, super. Thank you, Anish. Thank you so much for this insight to all the challenges. As you rightly said, we don't want the youngsters to feel that everything is grim and dark. But yes, exposing our youngsters to this, as you rightly said, is an important aspect. I'm picking up a question from the YouTube channel that we have. And there's a question by Yashwardhan Dalmia. He's saying that he would be happy to know from you if you think that the proposed Cheetah reintroduction program will be helpful to boost conservation in and around Kuno.
Hi, Yashwardhan. Good question. I think reintroduction per se, I don't subscribe to so much. So I'm not too keen on bringing the dinosaurs back, because the fact that they are not there, they probably they don't have the kind of space that they need to survive. But in terms of cheetah, I feel if cheetahs can help us secure grassland habitats, which are anyways going, because grasslands are very easily convertible into farmlands, and many of our government policies think of grasslands as wastelands, and so cheetah is synonymous with that kind of habitat. Kuno may not be an ideal habitat for cheetah, but it's a well protected area. There is a lot of grassland there, so they may survive there. But the biggest benefit from reintroduction of cheetah will be if we are able to earmark 3,000 to 4,000 square kilometers of grassland habitats in maybe parts of Rajasthan, part of Gujarat, or even a part of Uttar Pradesh, where those kind of grasslands were present in the past. So yes, I find that cheetahs will survive in Kuno, because there are several such habitats in Africa as well where cheetahs live. But Kuno is already protected. So, and there are tigers in Kuno. If the government in Madhya Pradesh wanted, they could have easily had about 40-45 tigers by now. But they waited for the lion, and the lion didn't come because of political reasons. Finally, the cheetah is coming. So that way, it's good. However, most importantly, they need to find place for that animal and much larger habitat, because Kuno is about 700 square kilometers of inviolate space, but it's about 1,000 plus square kilometer of area. But the real cheetah habitat is much smaller. But we need to find good quality habitats in Rajasthan, in Gujarat, and see if we can introduce it there. But before that, we will have to make sure that the density of people is reduced there and that the wild prey is brought back. So without prey, there can be no predator.
Thank you, Anish.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Anish sir, for this wonderful lecture. It was in equal parts motivating and worrying, and I got to learn so much from it. So one question that I have is, you mentioned that people are migrating to wealthier countries in response to climate change and also for better opportunities, right? So we find that often these wealthier countries that they are migrating to, they are the primary polluters in the world, right? They are the ones causing a major portion of the pollution. So why is it that these countries are not proportionately affected by these effects?
Because see, these countries, I mean, just let's talk about specific countries. So America, for instance, North America, I'm talking, not America as in general. You can look at the currency of America, a dollar, US dollar, and compare it with Indian rupee, and you know, though there is a vast difference, right? If you look at EU, if you look at UK, and you can see that a pound to rupee again conversion. So there is enough money to insulate them, because they can buy water, because water is going to be extremely rare, because of pollution, because of forest degradation, and whatever we call it. At that point, the poor country, already people are looking for a cheaper option, which means government subsidies are given on solar pumps, and the solar pumps are switched on all day till there is sunlight, and they keep pumping water out from the water table. The water table is going down, and that water table was formed through millions of years of natural processes. So you cannot replenish that water. So in India currently, huge areas are being irrigated through water that is found under the land. And that's scary, because A, that place becomes hollow because the water is going out. B, that can have other implications, but a much more severe implication is that that water will end at any point in time, and you will not get water. In fact, you go to any place, you will see that the solar or the pumps, the bore wells have to be very deep, sometimes go down almost 2000 feet. So what I'm saying is, in countries which are already poor, the acute shortage of some natural resource can really create a very severe impact on the poorest of the poor. But because the people in the prosperous countries have a buffer of money, the government is able to support unemployed people, right? Even during COVID, there were so many packets, money packets that were given out to people, right? There. So therefore, they are insulated. But this insulation is not going to be for long, because, as I said, a lot of people who are from the developing nations would want to migrate there. Some of those will migrate through proper channels, which means through applications for immigration, or to go and do a job based on their strengths. But a majority of people will migrate because they just have no option, and they are ready to risk their lives. And because there is corruption anywhere you go on earth, it is possible for somebody to bribe somebody at the borders and get into a country. Even in the US, there are so many people who are entering against the wish of the government. Now, think about this 20 years down the line. You already see thousands of people migrating out of Ukraine because of a war-like situation, right? So therefore, it is like a symptomatic treatment, which means you migrate, you feel, my life in this new country will be better, but you are adding onto the burden to the country that you are going, and that country will soon start retaliating. And sometimes how this pans out is in many different ways. For instance, if I am not from a country that I'm living in, I'm ready to compromise many things. So I can work at a much cheaper labor. So I'll be a much cheaper labor than somebody who lives there. And so eventually what happens is, the people who live there or who are born there, they will start looking at me as a big threat to them, because I'm able to work at 50% the money that they are going to take. And so the corporates will use me than those people there. And therefore there will be that kind of those kind of fights that come up. And therefore you see, even in our country, this jativad that you see, that, you don't want South Indians in Bombay, you don't want Bangladeshis in Assam, you don't want, North Indians in South. All this is an offshoot of lack of opportunity. And lack of opportunity because problem in terms of how much land and how much water is available.
Thank you so much, sir. That solves my doubt.
The next question is from Sarah. Her comment is 26 COPs, 6 IPCs assessments, and none of it is good news. What gives you hope, and what you would say India should tackle in the near future to cultivate resilience?
So India's biggest strength is its social capital. And again, the biggest strength is its culture. So between social capital and culture, India has what no other country has, which means in this stressful situation, you have seen, Sarah, in the times of COVID, can you imagine a country which is already, reeling under so many other pressures. Even before COVID came, there was a huge issue in terms of unemployment. And yet COVID has not seen the kind of anger that you have seen in so many prosperous countries. Why? It's not because we are scared of the government or whatever. It is because we are resilient in so many ways. We can live in a very frugal manner. And that is an extremely strong point of people who live on this land. And so we have the strength. There is a lot of knowledge now. Your generation, your generations after you also, who are going and learning things everywhere. And I can see that there is a lot of reverse migration also. People, when I was doing my PhD, my masters, there are a lot of people who went and they are settled in America. But now I see people who are going there in the last 10, 15 years. There are a lot of them who are actually returning back to the country. So that is giving me hope. I think in terms of resilience, we have to find a solution to agriculture. So instead of talking technology, big earth movers, big highways, big railways, bullet train, no, that's not what we need. What we need is fueling our local economies. So instead of having this few hubs like Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, Calcutta, Hyderabad, or whatever you call it, we need to decentralize. So India's strength will be social capital, and because of which decentralization, which means energy that is decentralized, solar, hybrid, or whatever you call it, agriculture which is efficient, which means 50% of Indians have the opportunity to contribute to the fight against climate change by moving from farming, which is the type of farming that we see in terms of either cash crop, which is hungry for water and pesticide and fertilizer, to agroforestry, where we build forests back, but with vegetation that can be used. So it is green carbon. You can grow a tree and cut it and grow and cut. That is not bad for the environment because while growing, it is already absorbing carbon. So you need to move from this zero-sum game kind of an agriculture, which is energy inefficient, where we're using so much water, we are drying so much of soil. And when you take farming, for instance, most farms, they can take one crop, one crop, maximum two crops, but mostly one crop. So there is something on that field, which is a flat land, not a single tree, for just 3 to 4 months. The remaining 8 months, it's lying open. A lot of dust is going up. So once you start building the forest back through agroforestry, you will be able to A, use green carbon, which means you can burn that wood, create electricity from there. B, you will get the biodiversity back. You will soon start having multi-story farming because people will realize that it is inefficient way of just growing big trees. So you will have big trees, medium-sized trees, bamboos, because bamboo is an extremely fast-growing plant. It can be used for so many things. Your paper, your wood, tiles, walls, so many things can be built with bamboo. You will have herbs for your medicines. We know so much of our Vedas, and there's so much knowledge in the Ayurveda. So you can use all that. So you will have, cheaper medicine. You will be able to have enough earning. You will be able to have a good housing because you will get so much wood. So you will not fight you will not go for sand mining. You will not burn the forest, and biodiversity comes back. Ecosystem services also come back. And so I think the resilience, we have it in us, but we have to tackle on one big problem, and that is an inefficient farming. And I would say if we can, as the government of different states, start looking at it as a big problem, then I think other countries will come to India to learn from us. We don't really have to go out there to learn. Plus, tourism. A lot of money can be made through tourism. If we go into agroforestry, soon you will have rejuvenated streams. There can be a lot of sports in the water. There could be a lot of trekking. There could be a lot of village life kind of tourism, where people from different countries can come and actually look at Indian culture. So I think I am hopeful that we see a lot of these COP26 lookalikes will fail because we are trying to fit. We want to find one solution for so many different countries. We know the problem. So all the countries have to fight that problem. Now, the solution to that problem will be different based on the strengths of that country. So India's strength is number of people, good amount of rain, because we are in the tropical country, and the inherent resilience to stresses. We have seen the worst when we were being, where the British were ruling for 200 years, but we have not become frustrated after they left. We have still rebuilt this entire nation, and we are, a challenge. We are a force to reckon with for so many other countries. So I'm very hopeful, Sarah, and I think young people will matter, but we should not lose out on the wisdom of the old. So it has to be a good mix to see the traditional knowledge that exists in a very innovative way, but there is no silver bullet. You have to definitely go after agriculture and try and find food, wood, and sustainable forest produce from there. That is what will get us out of this. Currently, we are fighting this. It's all knee jerk because we are trying to solve the health problem. So therefore, we'll build hospitals. Then we'll have ventilators. So there'll be 1 million ventilator. Now nobody will use that. But try and solve this. So when you have a pandemic, then you have to fight immediately. But you cannot lose sight on the long-term issue. So the long-term solutions have to come through policy, so that we have a 25-year plan strategy, so that all these different arms of the government can work in tandem and see how that 1-point agenda of securing at least 30 to 35% of this country as a place which is sacrosanct for nature. If we are able to do that, we will solve. And we'll have so many Indians who will be taken on as consultants in other countries. There's a lot of money to be made in this field.
Thank you, Anish. More questions pouring in on our YouTube viewership and audience. Harsha L asks, what percentage of Indian sociology contribute to environmental conservation?
I don't know the exact percentage, but sociology, I think, for instance, in WCT, we have people who are social scientists. Because as I said, we don't work with animals, we work for conservation, but our constituency and our currency is wildlife. But most of our work and all of our work is with people. And so there is huge. I think I know of so many organizations who are driven by their passion for humans and to reduce either poverty or fight inequity or gender bias that exists in the society. And when I and some of those people are my friends, and when we sit together, we do talk about, and they do realize that environment is a big thing. So if we can, so they also realize that for solving most of their problems in villages, they need to first start looking at a healthy environment, because from that healthy environment will come the raw materials that those people can use. So I think a big chunk people and a lot of people are motivated to do good for humans. And if we can get all those people on the side of conservation, I think we'll kind of have a multiplier effect. So there are already people who love wildlife. There are people who love animals, people who love landscapes. And then there is a majority of people who want to do something for people. So I think we in the NGO sector are also realizing it, and there are some consortiums that Wildlife Conservation Trust is part of, where we have people from all types of NGOs working in the human space as well as on the environment space, pollution space, policy space, legal space, and conservation space. They're all coming together to solve one problem. I think we need to, and the government also, as I said, different departments all have to work together. And similarly, people who are focused on the social side have to take into consideration the environment if they want to solve the problems on the social side.
Super. The next question is from an ID called Wedge Animal 21. So one of the major causes of loss of forest and biodiversity is animal agriculture. How many years do you think would India take to move to completely plant-based food, considering we are 70% non-vegetarians?
So I don't know your exact name, but I think it's a very, very good question again. So I was only talking about the most important thing that we have to do. And that's agriculture, finding solutions and getting efficient agriculture back. But what you have raised is also very important. But we are fortunate. India, there is huge amount of vegetarians here. Right? There are so many people who practice vegetarianism, and so if you went to the just in terms of kgs of meat per person consumed in the West is a magnitude more than what is consumed in India. There are many reasons to it. A, there are a lot of vegetarians. B, we cannot afford that kind of meat. And but most of our global big issues of degradation of Amazon is because they have to grow corn so that they can feed cattle. So a lot of our forests are going because they have to grow food for animal farms. And so definitely people will have to move away from non-vegetarian food. It's up to them whether they want to move willingly or they want to be forced, because going forward, the kind of pollutants, the kind of hormones that I have infiltrated into the farms, so for meat, for eggs, for so many things, even in fisheries, if you go and there are so many fish farms, and there too they are adding chemicals so that the productivity and the yield can go up. All this is ending up in our bloodstream, and our endocrine system are getting hampered. People and that is showing up on the younger generation. Kids of the age of 10, 12 are already showing signs of imbalance. And so it's a matter of time that we will have to move on plant-based diet. And I think veganism, people do make fun of it. It's sometimes looked at as impractical. It may be true because we have created an inefficient system. So unless you go to a mall, you cannot survive in a city. So that's the faulty system of the city. But when you start seeing that the health of your children is going down because of the meat that you are eating, families will move away, because nobody wants to see their children suffering. And so I think I can't put the exact date as to when this is all going to happen, but I do see that a lot of people are moving away. In fact, people do have to move away from milk as well. Milk is actually poison for anybody who is more than 1.5 years old. But people have glass fulls of milk. They're having milk morning, evening. We don't have the flora in our stomach, nor do we have the enzymes to digest the alpha amino acids in the milk that we take. And so it's a myth. We have been bred on milk actually, and that's why we think that without milk we cannot survive. But actually, if milk was a staple diet of mammals, then our mothers would be lactating all their lives. But there is no species where a mother is feeding their babies beyond a few months. In human beings, because we are long lived, the breastfeeding goes on for even a year and more sometimes. But otherwise, most species, they are weaned off in 3 or 4 months or 5 months. Forget about the primates, other species. Why? Because they move from liquid diet to solid diet, and with it in your body itself, those enzymes that were breaking down the milk and getting the nutrients out are not there anymore. So the milk, that is the only benefit from the milk that you have, is calcium and fat. That's the reality actually. So we need to understand meat, milk, we'll have to move away, because a lot of chemicals are bombarded into your body because of that.
Anish, isn't it a big challenge for people to select the lesser of the evil? Because today, even the vegetables and the fruits that we get are genetically modified, or they are a bag full of pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers.
Yeah, see, people like to solve problems by simplifying them. So when there is a big problem, for instance, if somebody has cancer, then the fastest way is to give them a painkiller. Because if they have a bone cancer, the pain is so much, you give them. So most of our problem solving happens on the surface because it's easy. The deeper you go, the more difficult it gets. But for people who really want to change things, they have to look at the entire stacking of problems. And based on their capacity, there will be people who want to work on the surface, let them work. But the biggest solutions will come when you get into the complexities of it. So there is, I'm sure, that nothing is pollution free now. But the fact that we recognize that these things are a wrong practice, that it's actually going to weaken the next generation and also destroy the environment. If we give ourselves no option, then we will find solutions. But if we are always going to give 5 options to us, we will always go for the easy, the low-hanging fruit. And in doing so, we will not be able to change anything. So just by not using paper, I'm not going to save this planet anymore. Or not using plastic. That is just one of the 5 million other things that I need to do. Similarly, definitely we need to. So once we start getting into the agroforestry bit, once people understand that the Punjab model is not a sustainable model, and that you will have trains with cancer patients going out of Punjab. That's all we have achieved. And yet, the farmers from Punjab were sitting in Delhi during COVID, right? Because there was a farmers' agitation there. So they should have been actually happier than all other farmers, but they were not. With those vast stretches of bald farms, it doesn't work. Everybody's understood, not only in India, so many people in North America have realized that these big farming monstrous machines are not a solution. They are only going to push the topsoil into the air, and eventually the soil is depleted of nutrients to such an extent that without fertilizers you can't even grow the poorest of vegetation on it. So desertification is what we are causing because of the kind of agriculture we do. So the moment we move from this zero-sum game and this subsistence farming into agroforestry, then you will have the pesticides gone from your system. You will have fertilizers gone from, because you will get enough fertilizers from the leaf. And so then the food will become good, then it becomes healthier. So, and anyways, in nature, I believe, and human beings are part of nature, most things that are not efficient are thrown out of the system. So we have to actually unlearn and understand that we are no different from an ant, or no different from a frog, or no different from a mosquito. If we understand that, we'll become humble, and then we will be able to unlearn better.
Thank you. Thank you. One more question from YouTube. Siddesh Shetty is asking, with the current issue going on in the world, that is the Ukraine-Russia crisis, how will it affect the environment?
Oh, it's going to affect in a big way, because nuclear weapons are very easy. You just have to press a button. So if anybody, goes that direction, it's irreparable damage. But environmentally, any war is going to destroy homes, people's lives, and those peoples will be actually pushed back 50 years, or maybe some of them will never come out of the shock. And when you have people who have suffered so much, they want to have a better life, much more better than they had, because you also have to pamper yourself, and that's psychology. So too much of suppression will, people just break free, and then they want excess. So on the psychological level, there is going to be huge impact. Again, migration of so many people into countries will damage environment in those countries. Spread of disease is huge. Also the kind of scare that's there in people's mind. I mean, one of my friends who teaches in a special children. So she is, does vocation for the special children, and she was in a class of children who were, from age group 14 to 21, and there was a discussion amongst children. They have some congenital issues already. There were children who were, so they came and asked her as to, will we survive beyond this month, because they overheard their parents speaking that there is a war somewhere. Can you imagine? I mean, we are talking about a generation of people who have not even lived on this, just 10, 15, 20 years is not the kind of life that's kind of. So my issue with wars is not the blood that you see, or the deaths that you see. It is the permanent scar that it lives on the young mind. And that, I think, is the biggest threat to the planet, that if in the 21st century, and this 20th century and the 21st century are the least bloodiest of them all. The 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th century, there was a lot more blood, a lot more headhunting that happened during that time. So we have, since the UN was formed, there is a lot more peace on this planet. But human beings are going to be human beings. There is going to always be, tragedy of commons. Everybody wants to maximize, and that character plays out in all types of people, whether they are rich or poor, doesn't matter. That single, I would call it in Hindi, kida that we have is it's going to show its ugly face again and again, and this war is just a byproduct of it. There are so many wars that are waiting to happen next. It's just that this has happened now, but there are so many countries who are fighting on the borders. You can see India, we are surrounded by people. People are worried about so many different nations. So every nation has some enemy or the other. So yeah, it's a scary thing. An environment never benefits from a war.
Two more interesting questions on the YouTube. Anish, I hope you have the time.
Yeah, I do have.
Zeba is asking that, as we know, due to the rise in sea level, most parts of Mumbai are going to be submerged, but still we have ongoing construction of several coastal projects. How is it going to be economically feasible?
It is not economically feasible for the future. Economical feasibility is only for the ruling party. So the party that during whose tenure a project is envisioned is the party that benefits from it. No, who said that infrastructure projects were ever done for economic viability? There is never, show me one mining project, show me one airport project, show me one 6-lane highway project, which is ever going to be profitable. That's never the case. So it's a myth. It's only on paper. Most of these monstrous projects go against nature. Anything that goes against nature cannot be sustainable or viable. So economic feasibility is a buzzword, really. Anything, if we are going to, what is Bombay? Most of the famous cities or cities that are fueling the business on this planet are on the coast, because those cities had a lead time because of ports. In the past, technology, we didn't have planes, we didn't have road transport. Mostly it was all by boat. So most of these wealthy cities are on the coastline, and yet the businesses that they are doing are more environment unfriendly than they were 20 years, 30 years ago. And all of those big cities, which are fueling, as I said, the economy of this planet, are under threat from climate change. Bombay is just one of those many cities. You think of any city that you know of, which is big, which is a metropolis, and it's not on the ocean. You can only count on your fingertips. So yes, we don't do projects because they are environment friendly. We do projects because they fuel economy, which means the GDP. GDP by definition is flawed because it measures the exchange of money, and you can pay money to build, you can pay money to break. So right now the GDP is going up because we are building left, right, and center. Tomorrow we already know that what we are doing, like in Ken Betwa, there is Panna Tiger Reserve. I know Parvish knows, we all love that landscape because of those gorge and the river Ken flowing through those beautiful blue waters and tigers. So many people have fought all their lives to protect that landscape. It had lost all tigers, and now there are more than 50 tigers there. And now the government has okayed a project of river linking. So most of those gorges, the gorgeous gorges that we see of Panna, will be underwater. Nearly 70 square kilometers of Panna Tiger Reserve will be submerged. If you go by logic, if you go by the sustainability principles, you don't even have to ask a kindergarten kid whether that project is going to be good or not. That project cannot be good, but it is going to happen. And so feasibility and sustainability are words that are thrown so that environment can be pilfered. So please understand that GDP, we need to first, there should be a movement where we take into consideration the negative impact of infrastructure, inbuilt that negative impact on our natural capital into the calculation of GDP. Then you will see that our sustainability models will all fail, because the benefit from destroying a forest is not even 1% of the benefit of that particular forest to us. But the only difference is that this short benefit is in a very short time. Few people who are powerful can make money. But when you protect that as a natural ecosystem, the benefit is maybe a quantum more, but it is realized across 1,000 years, and that we don't have a patience. And so always when you look at, there is never a tug of war between development and conservation. Any development that doesn't take care of, or they don't take into consideration ecosystems and the health of ecosystems, cannot be feasible. Blanket statement, that is.
Thank you. And the last question is by Kimaya Gajare. How would you guide young people on how they can fight policymakers and politicians as they hold important strings in conservation?
So I am a catalyst. So I don't fight, I fool, which means I fool water to believe that it is oil, and I fool oil to believe that it's water, and therefore oil and water can coexist. So my PhD work was on microemulsification, where oil globules were impregnated in water and vice versa. So you don't fight the policymakers, you become a policymaker. And then take the right decision. So there are a lot of policymakers who are genuine, and there are a lot of politicians who are good. There are a lot of bureaucrats who are good, and I worked with all of them. I mean, so many of good people I worked. So a lot of good things that WCT is able to deliver is not because of WCT alone. WCT team is amazing, and they are going and finding scientific answers. But eventually, it is being implemented somewhere, and that is being done by officers and policymakers. So there are people in the Finance Commission who really want this nation to survive as a green nation. There are bureaucrats who want to make sure that the inequity between people goes down. Even if they are interested in forest, they do think about people. So there are so many such people. When you start doing good work, when you start solving long-term problems, when you start solving real problems, you automatically meet good people. And so don't search for them, start doing good work, and they will come to you, because they also want to do well. And so I don't fight policymakers. I think we have to become policymakers. And policymakers, I'm not saying you have to become a civil servant or whatever that you may not want to do. You could do whatever you want to do. If you are going to solve a genuine problem, automatically you will meet people in the ministries, you will meet people in the government who will scale that up. So don't put them all in the same bracket. I think we must protest wherever there is a problem, but protesting, I would give a lesser rating than problem solving. So I would invest more time in working with like-minded people in the government, so that we can make some change while I am still capable of doing so. I will start protesting once I can't do things physically. So I'll also do that. But currently, I work as a catalyst, working with people in the system. That's what I think you must do. That will not allow you to feel frustrated. You will not give up on anything. So people say, how do you have hope? If I was only fighting every day, I would not feel like getting up out of the bed. But because I try to solve problems, every day is very interesting for me. And I don't find solutions for so many things. My teams are working day in and out. There are so many women and men who are in the field collecting data. And there are frustrating times. But they find solace in discussing with each other rather than, blowing their trumpet out in media. So I think people who want to solve problems are quiet workers, and you should do that. Try doing that. There will be enough opportunity to make noise as well. But hold on. First, be quiet and try to make that difference.
Thank you, Anish. Our dear friend, Mr. Bittu Sehgal, has been a mute spectator right from the commencement of your talk. May I request Bittu please to join, unmute himself as well as switch on his camera. Bittu?
He may have just stepped out or whatever. You can call him on his phone and.
Yeah. No, he's also having problems with his new Apple computer, the PC. Yeah.
Hi.
Anish,
Hola.
how come everything that you say I tend to agree with?
Because we have for many years inhaled the same oxygen.
I think so.
And we are connected through those forests that you guys protected when you were,
When I was young.
40 years younger than what you are today.
Yeah, and by the way, when you introduced him, Parvesh, you didn't explain that when he was even younger than he is now, and he's pretty young now, he used to be known as Tattiwala Sahab. And the reason was that he was doing, carnivore diet studies. He was looking at wild dogs and he was looking at this and he was collecting shit. This was his, every time he'd collect shit, he was like putting money in the bank, So the guards used to call him Tattiwala Sahab, but he was one of the finest field biologists, scientists that I've seen. And the fact that he's been speaking all this time about policy and things like this just shows you the evolution of the man. Kanish, close your ears. But I want young people to understand that, look, you don't, as Anish said, you don't have to be a biologist, you don't have to be a forest guard, you just have to be somebody who cares enough, who knows enough, and you'll make a difference. And Anish said the right thing, nature will repair itself. Chances are that we might not be able to adapt soon enough, so then we might suffer a lot. But in the end, the biosphere will win, Anish.
Yes.
Absolutely.
The viruses will outlive us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anish, for joining, and beautiful, beautiful thoughts that I'm sure young people will take it and will follow their passion, implementing many of your ideas and thoughts into their careers. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Sanctuary and all the staff, Prachi, Saurabh, everybody for coordinating this. Thank you so much.
Bye, Anish. Take care.